quiet, non-aggressive, and without the air of an accusation. Yet it was this very calmness that made the final message left by Rob Reiner's wife so impactful. In just a few short lines, she touched upon issues that had been avoided for years, raising a host of questions and forcing the public to re-examine what seemed all too familiar. Why did this message appear at this particular time, and what lies behind those seemingly gentle words? If you want to fully understand the context and layers of meaning behind this story that is causing such a stir, please like the video to support it, subscribe to the channel to not miss more in-depth analyses, and join the discussion by leaving a comment below. You know, my wife, she made me a real person. When you're a young man, you're like an unfinished draft. Then you meet the right woman, and in a very natural way, she helps you grow. Those words were once repeated with a warm tone, like a familiar Hollywood story about family, guidance, and growing up. Then the public heard another comment from Billy Bush, a veteran entertainment reporter, when he referred to Romy Reiner, then only 19 or 20, as someone who had found her family. Initially, it all sounded like another sensational news story that would quickly fade away. But that feeling didn't last. As the first investigative findings emerged, the picture began to change. Investigators were then said to have focused on a very narrow time frame, and that very time frame immediately put many involved on alert. Initial assessments suggest this was neither a spontaneous outburst nor a random moment. All signs point to what happened likely having been building up and simmering behind closed doors until it could no longer be contained. Some familiar with the situation say the tension may have begun earlier that evening at a private Christmas party. Guests present recalled Nick behaving unusually, less talkative, more tense, and seemingly no longer as relaxed as usual. According to those descriptions, a heated argument erupted during the gathering. But what's noteworthy is that the atmosphere didn't end with the party. It seems to have followed Nick out of the event, spreading throughout the rest of the night and casting a shadow over everything that followed. After leaving, he reportedly returned to the Brentwood area. It is from this point that the story begins to become difficult to explain. Investigators described his demeanor as eerily calm. His gait was steady, his actions orderly, and his face showed no signs of panic or distress. Security camera footage and witness accounts showed no signs of chaos. There was no hasty behavior, no obvious mistakes, no signs of losing control. Ironically, this very normality caused authorities even more concern. According to records, Nick later checked into a nearby hotel. He moved discreetly, communicated briefly, paid, and went to his room like any other guest, without drawing attention or leaving a particular impression. Then came a detail that raised many questions. Shortly afterward, Nick reportedly contacted Alan Jackson, a prominent and influential defense attorney. Initial legal proceedings took place amidst uncertainty surrounding the details. Public responses at the time were very cautious. Medical status, court appearance dates, and whether formal filings had been made, all were mentioned in careful procedural language. The legal team offered little further comment beyond affirming that everything was proceeding according to legal procedures. Meanwhile, unofficial sources suggested that the family's financial resources may have been used to advance the initial proceedings. This alone raises many questions, given the confidence behind those decisions. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, the events in the house are believed to have occurred sometime between midnight and dawn. There were no signs of forced entry, as that seemed unnecessary. Anyone present was familiar with the space, had access to it, and knew the house well. Security records later showed Nick appearing at a Santa Monica hotel around dawn, not far from the location. The hotel staff recalled him as quiet, unassuming, showing no signs of stress or panic. No emergency calls, no signs of distress, just a man sitting still, seemingly completely detached from what was happening elsewhere. Hours passed, and the silence gradually turned to anxiety. A regular visitor stopped by the house, but received no response. The doorbell went unanswered. There was no movement inside, and repeated calls went silent. When the door finally opened, what was inside shattered all previous assumptions, and from that moment, the story took a completely different turn. As authorities moved in and cordoned off the scene, a common understanding quickly emerged. This was no isolated incident or outburst. What was seen resembled the culmination of a series of events that unfolded throughout the night, silently spiraling out of control without any intervention. For many following the case, the chilling feeling stemmed not only from the event itself, but also from its context. A family synonymous with success, influence, and stability, a name all too familiar in American popular culture, found itself at the center of a tragedy that shocked the public. Rob Reiner had long been considered a Hollywood icon, successful, wealthy, and residing in Brentwood, one of Los Angeles's most affluent neighborhoods. The area had been linked to notorious crimes throughout history, and this very fact drew closer scrutiny to every detail. According to initial reports from authorities, the two victims were found with multiple serious injuries, indicating a high degree of violence and a deeply personal nature to the incident. Authorities stated that the suspect was the son of the family, a piece of information that further shocked the public. Stories surrounding this family were immediately unearthed. They met in the context of their film careers, working together on a famous film project where creativity and personal relationships were closely intertwined. The wife was mentioned as a renowned photographer involved in many major projects and associated with important milestones in Hollywood. Initially, all these details were simply recounted as familiar background information about a successful family. But as the investigation progressed, the story was no longer just a glamorous image. According to released surveillance data, the previous evening, Nick was seen at a gas station near the city center. The footage showed him appearing restless, pacing more than usual, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings, yet calm enough to perform everyday actions like buying drinks. Shortly afterward, authorities approached and apprehended him near the area. There was no resistance, no justification, no dramatic reaction. Subsequent video footage showed a person who looked tired, quiet, and almost emotionally empty. Forensic experts later concluded that the deaths may have occurred hours before the victims were discovered. This time, Gap raised a series of new questions. Investigators suggested the suspect may have attempted to erase evidence before leaving the house or later at another location. However, according to experts, crucial evidence is very difficult to completely remove. Data from security cameras around the Santa Monica area helped investigators reconstruct the movements. They narrowed down the timeline and shed more light on what happened. Another chilling detail was the hypothesis that the murder weapon may have been a familiar object within the house itself. This suggests a high degree of familiarity with the space, and the victim played a crucial role, refuting the assumption of a random act. Further forensic analysis also altered initial perceptions. Early assessments suggesting a single moment of loss of control were reconsidered when evidence pointed to multiple injuries. According to experts, such repeated behavior often reflects deliberate intent and control rather than a spontaneous reaction lasting a few seconds. Another hypothesis is that the victims may have been resting when the incident began. If this is confirmed, and it would reveal a deep understanding of each other's habits and vulnerabilities, a factor usually only seen in very close relationships. Investigators emphasize that actions at such close proximity are often highly personal, going far beyond the concept of immediate conflict. Public attention then quickly shifted to legal developments. Information revealed that Nick had quickly sought out a prominent defense attorney, known for taking only exceptionally serious and complex cases. This rapid legal approach raised many questions, particularly about the source of funding for the enormous fees. In response to press inquiries, the attorney remained silent, refusing to disclose details, further fueling public tension. Finally, an update from sources close to the family indicated that legal costs were reportedly being covered through the family estate, with an estimated value of very large. This information doesn't close the story. On the contrary, it opens a new chapter with more debate about power, influence, and how personal tragedies can become complicated when intertwined with fame and fortune. According to those familiar with the situation, the remaining family members believe that focusing on mental health through a controlled and humane treatment plan is the most appropriate option in this context. They believe this approach reflects the spirit Rob and Michelle had for their son and is consistent with current California law. However, the deeper the story delves, the more unanswered questions arise. The issue is no longer about what happened, but what led to this irreversible point. California's legal framework further complicates the picture. By law, any individual convicted in such a case is prohibited from benefiting from the victim's assets. This fact is overshadowing all decisions related to the case. However, the key point is that while direct inheritance rights are blocked, the law does not automatically prohibit the use of estate funds for defense expenses as long as it is approved by living relatives or the estate administrator. Legal analyst Sean Wesner stated that, technically, this might be permitted during the proceedings, but it carries significant risks and potential controversy. Some experts believe the estate administrator could completely refuse such expenditures to avoid public backlash or legal repercussions. To date, neither the family nor the court has officially disclosed the specific source of the funds, and this silence only fuels speculation. Family loyalty, responsibility, and public pressure are clashing head-on, with neither side ready to make a final decision. Amidst the debates, a fragmented account is repeated, reflecting the chaotic mental state of the person involved. A feeling of loss of control, a lingering obsession, and a struggle not only with the addiction, but also with self-discipline and how to face life. These words, though interrupted, reveal the depth of a turbulent inner journey. Then, a crucial turning point occurs when Nick Reiner makes his first court appearance, facing 2 serious charges with aggravating circumstances involving multiple victims. And his image in his simple prison uniform creates a stark contrast to the privileged background once associated with the Reiner family. Beside him is his lawyer, Alan Jackson, calm and clearly well prepared. The hearing is tightly controlled, with no live cameras present, further increasing public attention. From the outset, Jackson requested a postponement of formal proceedings, citing his client's need for more time to consider his next legal course of action. The judge granted this request and scheduled the next hearing, while Nick remained in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail. Throughout the hearing, Nick spoke only once, briefly confirming his waiver of the right to a speedy trial. No explanation, no justification. Just minutes later, the courtroom closed, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere and many unanswered questions. As attention focused on the upcoming trial, investigators and observers began to examine another, less discussed, but equally important aspect: Nick's years-long personal struggle behind his famous surname. Born in the early 1990s, reports indicate he began exposure to addictive substances at a very young age. From there, a vicious cycle gradually formed. Growing up amidst high expectations, family pressure, and constant public scrutiny, Nick's world was described as being heavily burdened from an early age. Those close to the family say warning signs appeared years earlier, and Rob and Michelle didn't ignore them. When Nick was a teenager, they proactively intervened, taking him to treatment, initiating a long series of rehabilitation attempts, failures, and brief periods of progress. Even when things got worse, they didn't turn their backs. The family door remained open. Over the years, they continued to strive for stability and support, eventually allowing Nick to return to their Brentwood home, hoping that this time, balance would finally be achieved. That decision has now become the focal point of the entire case, raising agonizing questions about how far the fine line between responsibility, boundaries, and parental loyalty can go. Close friends say Rob always believed that giving Nick a clear purpose in life could be an anchor to keep him grounded. He often involved his son in creative projects, working together whenever possible, hoping that work and connection would provide a support system. But addiction is not easily overcome. Each sign of recovery was fragile, appearing in brief bursts and disappearing as quickly as it appeared. And the home, once considered a safe haven, gradually transformed into a tense space where constant anxiety permeated every aspect of life. Those close to the family say Rob always lived by one unwavering principle: parents never abandon their children. That belief guided all his decisions for many years. However, as things became increasingly unstable, what friends described as harsh love eventually forced Nick to leave his family to live independently. He moved constantly between states, from Maine and New Jersey to Texas, seeking independence and a new beginning, but according to those who knew him, what he found was more uncertainty than stability. In the rare conversations that have been recalled, Nick once said that the hardest thing wasn't admitting his own problems, but feeling labeled by the world simply because of his background. And the feeling of being seen as a spoiled rich kid made any attempt at explanation meaningless. According to those close to him, that pressure didn't come from his family, but from the gaze and prejudice of society. Living in the shadow of a famous surname meant constantly having to prove that his struggles were real, not the product of pampering. The noise from public opinion grew louder, and it was the first time Nick had faced such intense scrutiny head-on. The relentless gossip and judgment doubled the pressure. Those around him understood they could endure the criticism, but Nick couldn't. Few truly knew what he had been through, what he had suffered, and what had driven him to make those wrong choices. The gap between his public image and his personal reality widened. There was a brief moment of hope when Nick was lucid enough to collaborate with his father on the film Being Charlie. The film, reflecting in part his own internal struggles, helped the father and son reconnect after years of estrangement. For a time, trust seemed to be restored. But a few years later, that progress crumbled again. Reports of impulsive acts and significant property damage represent another setback in an already arduous journey. Subsequently, the family allowed Nick to return home, hoping that closer supervision might help him stabilize. However, according to friends, that optimism was no longer as complete as before. In the months leading up to the incident, Nick's behavior was described as increasingly erratic and unpredictable. That long and challenging history now casts a shadow over the courtroom, to becoming an integral part of the case file. Many believe that addiction and mental health issues will play a key role in the defense strategy. Alan Jackson is known for his focus on analyzing mental state and intent, and some insiders suggest the defense could argue that years of substance abuse impaired Nick's ability to control his behavior on the night of the incident. Witnesses at the Santa Monica Hotel reportedly described him as being in a severely weakened state. As the case unfolds, the past and present remain closely intertwined, and the public follows closely, waiting to see what will be revealed next. Under California law, the use of stimulants does not automatically absolve or mitigate criminal liability. Voluntary cognitive impairment is almost never a legal shield. In the most favorable scenario for the defense, that this factor can only influence how the court assesses intention. And intention is the key front in the entire case. Prosecutors have repeatedly emphasized that what happened that night reflected lucidity and control over one's actions, not panic or disorientation. If the evidence shows signs of preparation rather than a spontaneous reaction, then the path ahead for the defense will be particularly difficult. With the aggravating circumstances presented, Nick risks facing life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Even if these circumstances are not accepted, the potential sentence would still fall within the range of 25 years to life imprisonment. The prosecution's position remains unchanged to date. They maintain there were no signs of self-defense or unintentional accident. Analysts describe the incident as the result of pent-up emotions and uncontrolled behavior, rather than a momentary blunder or tragic misunderstanding. The case is further compounded by the fact that Rob and Michelle are Hollywood veterans with extensive networks and considerable influence. This alone elevates the case far beyond the scope of a typical criminal case. The list of potential witnesses reportedly includes familiar names such as Conan O'Brien, Larry David, and Billy Crystal, potentially turning the trial into a nationwide sensation. Many analysts predict that proceedings are unlikely to begin before the end of 2026, possibly even into early 2027, and the chances of reaching a plea deal are currently considered very low. Initial forensic conclusions are believed to have placed Nick directly at the scene, supported by biological evidence and surveillance footage. Age is also a factor the prosecution is expected to emphasize. While Rob and Michelle are older, Nick is only in his early 30s, and that age difference, combined with the prolonged nature of the events, could be argued as a sign of deliberate intent. From there, attention returns to the night believed to be the origin of the chain of events, the Christmas party at Conan O'Brien's house. Rob and Michelle brought Nick along because they were worried about his condition. Friends said Nick's behavior had become unpredictable, and leaving him alone was considered too risky. At the party, Nick was almost completely isolated. While everyone else was laughing and chatting, he stood alone at the edge of the room, his hoodie pulled up, his eyes constantly darting around. Some guests sensed the unusual atmosphere. Nick approached others abruptly, asking short, tense questions that interrupted conversations. The tension escalated after an awkward interaction with a regular guest. Then Nick suddenly left. The room fell silent. Michelle approached, trying to ease the tension, while Rob observed from a distance, maintaining a calm demeanor. Those present noted that Nick was taking prescribed medication, but a recent change in medication may have exacerbated his condition. Towards the end of the evening, Rob and Michelle prepared to leave. Several guests noticed them whispering, sensing something was amiss. An argument ensued, not loud enough to drown out the music, but sharp enough to draw attention. One person later recounted that Nick had accused his parents of speaking ill of him behind his back. By his voice strained and agitated, Rob reportedly tried to keep his voice low and even, gently suggesting they leave early. Tensions escalated when Nick shoved, knocking over a small table and spilling drinks. All eyes immediately turned. Security personnel approached, and the host quickly intervened, trying to de-escalate the situation before it got out of control. The group moved outside, and the atmosphere inside changed dramatically. Outside, the chill of the New Year's Eve night descended. Michelle clutched Rob's hand, her face pale with worry. Rob tried to lead Nick to the car, speaking softly and patiently, trying to persuade him. Michelle stood a short distance away, clearly frightened. Witnesses said Nick paced back and forth, his hands trembling, arguing in short, disjointed sentences. He shouted something unintelligible, and then suddenly lunged into the car and slammed the door shut. The family quietly left. For most of the guests, it was just an awkward, uncomfortable moment. But no one suspected it was the prelude to what would happen next. For Rob and Michelle, the silent drive home seemed to usher in the final hours of their lives. That night, several neighbors in Brentwood reported hearing low voices and tense sounds around midnight. There were no screams or obvious alarms, just what sounded like a prolonged, heavy family argument. The next morning, that very house became the focus of an investigation that rocked Hollywood. According to initial assessments by investigators, the atmosphere on the way home was still thick with tension. Nick was believed to have berated his parents for making him feel humiliated. Rob tried to defuse the situation, advising his son to rest and let things calm down. But when the door closed behind them, the conflict not only didn't subside but intensified. Forensic experts believe that sometime between midnight and dawn, Nick entered the master bedroom where his parents were resting. What triggered that moment remains a question mark. Anger, emotional overload, or something deeper that no one has yet explained. What followed was described as extreme and shocking. What made the event even harder to accept was the seemingly normal context beforehand. Close friends said Rob and Michelle had cautiously held hope for Nick's recent progress. They believed that therapy and medication were working. Rob had even spoken of the possibility of the whole family working together on a new creative project in the future. No one could have imagined everything collapsing so quickly and violently. When the news was confirmed, Hollywood was almost paralyzed. Initially, the news spread like a whisper of disbelief. Then the truth gradually became clear. Condolences flooded social media as colleagues and fans tried to comprehend how a close-knit and deeply loving family could be torn apart in a single night. Attention quickly shifted to Nick, his mental state, his past, and the warning signs many now wondered if they had overlooked. Old interviews resurfaced, including one where Nick said he felt born into the spotlight, a role he never wanted. That statement, in retrospect, weighed heavily on his mind. As investigators pieced together the fragments, from surveillance footage and forensic evidence to witness testimony, a sequence emerged. Erratic behavior, prolonged arguments, sudden departures, and a series of irreversible decisions. Yet the hardest questions remained unanswered. These were questions about responsibility, boundaries, and how much the love of family could endure before finally crumbling. Many psychologists in the media describe the situation as a perfect storm, where prolonged instability, emotional turmoil, and unresolved traumas collided simultaneously. The shock was further amplified when Conan O'Brien, known for his private life, issued a brief statement expressing his shock and grief. Nearly a year later, the case continues to dominate headlines, spark controversy, and prompt public searches for answers. A December evening that should have been a warm family reunion became the beginning of one of Hollywood's most haunting stories. It serves as a reminder that money, fame, or success cannot shield people from inner turmoil, and sometimes even families who have tried their best still face tragedy. If you want to continue closely following the developments of this case and explore more shocking celebrity stories, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel now. Don't stop here. Watch the next video appearing on the screen to discover more Hollywood dramas you'll hardly believe are real. See you in the next video.